In the quiet town of Eldora, the morning was still and cold. The sun had not yet risen, and a soft mist covered the ground. Madame Abney, a rich woman known for her elegant clothes and proud way of walking, was already awake. She liked to start her mornings early, sipping tea on her veranda while listening to the birds. Her big house stood on the edge of the town, surrounded by tall iron gates and flower gardens that few dared to enter. As she opened her front door that morning, ready to send her maid for fresh bread, she froze. Right at her doorstep lay a small bundle wrapped in a torn brown cloth. It moved slightly, and then came a soft cry, the kind that could melt even the coldest heart. Abney's eyes widened. "What is this?" she whispered, stepping closer. She leaned down, and as she pulled the cloth aside, she saw a baby, a tiny boy, his cheeks red from the cold, his lips trembling. His little hands waved weakly in the air. For a moment, Abney simply stared. She had seen many strange things in her life, but never had she woken to find a baby on her doorstep. Her first thought was fear. What if someone had abandoned the child there to trap her in trouble? What if people thought the baby was hers? She quickly looked around, her eyes scanning the quiet road outside her gate. There was no one. Not a single sound. Only the soft wind and the baby's cries. She called for her maid, Kesa. "Come here. Quickly." Kesa ran to her, her eyes wide with shock. "Madam, a baby." "Yes," Abney said, trying to sound calm, though her heart was racing. "Someone left him here. What should we do?" Kesa asked, trembling. "Call the police," Abney replied at first. But as she looked again at the baby's face, small, innocent, helpless, something inside her shifted. She hesitated. The baby had stopped crying now, as if he sensed safety near her. His tiny eyes, dark and curious, looked up at her. Abney felt her chest tighten. It was a feeling she hadn't known for years, something gentle, something like warmth. "No," she said slowly. "Bring a blanket. He's cold." Kesa blinked in surprise. "Madam, you want to." "Do what I say," Abney interrupted. Her voice was firm, but there was a softness in it that was new. She lifted the baby gently into her arms. He was lighter than she expected, and as she held him, he stopped crying completely. His little fingers caught the edge of her sleeve, and Abney felt her heart twist. "Who would leave such an innocent child?" she murmured. When Kesa returned with a warm blanket, Abney wrapped the baby carefully and carried him inside. The warmth from the fire touched the baby's skin, and soon he let out a small sigh, falling asleep in her arms. For a long while, Abney just sat there, watching him. Her house, which usually felt so quiet and empty, now seemed to hum with life. She thought of her own past. Years ago, she had been married, but her husband died before they could have children. Since then, she had filled her days with work and parties, collecting fine clothes, gold jewelry, and new cars, things that impressed others but never made her truly happy. As she looked at the baby, she felt a strange calmness, something she couldn't explain. When the police finally came, Abney hesitated before opening the door. She almost didn't want them to take the baby. But she had to tell them what happened. The officers took notes and asked questions, but they had no answers about where the child came from. "Someone must have left him in the night," one of them said. "We'll try to find his family." Abney nodded, but when they asked if they could take the baby to the orphanage, she stopped them. "No," she said quietly. "He will stay here for now, until you find his mother." The officers exchanged looks but didn't argue. They left her with a small promise to return with news. That night, Abney sat by the baby's side as he slept in a soft blanket near the fire. She couldn't take her eyes off him. His tiny chest rose and fell with each breath. Once in a while, he made small sounds in his sleep, soft murmurs that made her smile without realizing it. She wondered about the person who had left him. Was it a poor woman who had no means to care for him? Was it someone in danger? Or had the baby simply been abandoned, forgotten by the world? Abney shook her head, brushing away the thoughts. "Whoever you are," she whispered to the sleeping child, "you are safe now." In the days that followed, the house changed. The maids, who once moved quietly and stiffly, now found themselves smiling more often. The baby's laughter filled the halls, and Abney found herself spending more time with him than she ever expected. She gave him a name, Tari, which meant promise. Every morning, she would hold him near the window and whisper, "Good morning, little Tari." And though he could not yet speak, he would giggle, reaching for her face. Her friends laughed when they heard about it. "Ebony, you! Raising a child you found on your doorstep," one said during tea. "You'll ruin your image." Ebony only smiled. Maybe some images need to be broken. But deep down, she knew she was changing. 4 years she had lived for herself, believing love was too risky, too painful. But this child, this small, helpless being, had shown her something different. Sometimes at night, when the baby cried, Ebony would rise from her bed and walk across the marble floor to his cradle. She would hum softly until he slept again, her voice trembling with emotion she didn't know she had. One evening, as she sat near the window watching the sunset, Tari asleep in her lap, she realized something. The house no longer felt cold. The silence that used to weigh on her heart was gone. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, whether Tari's real mother would return or whether she would be forced to give him away. But in that moment, none of it mattered. What mattered was that for the first time in years, she felt alive. The baby had come into her life like a whisper, unexpected and fragile. But he had brought something greater than wealth. He had brought meaning. Ebony smiled softly and whispered, "Maybe you came to teach me what love truly is." Outside, the stars began to appear, and the quiet night wrapped around the house. Inside, the baby slept peacefully in her arms, and Ebony sat watching him, her eyes gentle and full of light. And though she did not yet know it, that small moment, that single act of opening her door, had changed her life forever. Ebony sat by the window one quiet morning, watching the sun rise over the roofs of Eldora. On her lap, the baby she had found weeks ago now slept peacefully. She had named him Tari, meaning promise. Every time she said the name, something warm filled her heart. She liked how it sounded, simple, gentle, full of hope. When she first brought Tari home, she told herself it would only be for a short while. The police were still looking for his real mother, and Ebony thought she was only keeping him safe. But days turned into weeks, and she found herself unable to let him go. His laughter had become part of the house. His cries made her heart ache. Her servants whispered behind her back. Her driver, Bako, shook his head whenever he saw her feeding the baby. "Madam, you are not young anymore," he said once. "Why trouble yourself with this child? You can send him to an orphanage." Ebony looked at him and said quietly, "If I send him away, who will hold him when he cries?" Word spread through the neighborhood. People began to talk. Her rich friends stopped visiting as often. They said cruel things behind her back. Imagine Madame Ebony, the richest woman in Eldora, raising a baby she found outside, one woman said at a gathering. "She must be losing her mind," another added. "All that money, and she chooses to care for a street baby." Ebony heard their words, but she didn't respond. Inside, she felt something changing. 4 years, her life had been full of empty praise and fake smiles. People respected her money, not her heart. But now, when Tari looked up at her and smiled, she felt real joy, something she had never bought with all her gold. Every evening, she sat with him by the fire, telling him stories in a soft voice. She talked about her late husband, about the time she was young and poor, and how she worked her way to success. Though Tari couldn't understand her words, his tiny eyes followed her lips, and his small hands reached for her face. She would laugh softly, holding his hand against her cheek. One day, while walking in the garden with Tari in her arms, she met her neighbor, Madame Fola. Fola raised an eyebrow. "So it's true," she said. "You've become a mother again." Ebony smiled. "Perhaps I was always meant to be one." Fola shook her head. "Be careful. You are letting your heart lead you. That is dangerous for a woman like you." "Maybe my heart knows better than my pride," Ebony replied. That night, Ebony couldn't sleep. She sat by the baby's cradle, watching him. The moonlight fell across his small face, and she felt a strange fear. What if someone came to take him away? What if his real mother appeared and wanted him back? Ebony tried to tell herself that she would be happy if that happened, but deep down, she knew it would break her heart. As months passed, Tari began to crawl, laugh, and call out little sounds that made everyone smile, even the maids who had once doubted him. The house felt alive again. There was music in the air, Simple laughter, the kind that didn't need money to exist. But one cold night, everything changed. It started with a soft cough. Then another. Ebony thought it was nothing at first. But soon, Tari's small body grew hot with fever. His breathing became weak, and his cries grew faint. Panic filled Ebony's heart. She called for the doctor immediately, her hands trembling as she held the baby close. When the doctor arrived, he checked Tari carefully. "It is a bad fever," he said. "We will do what we can, but he must be strong to fight it." Ebony's throat went dry. She felt helpless. She had all the money in the world, yet she could not stop the tiny boy from suffering. She sat beside him all night, her eyes never leaving his face. She placed a cool cloth on his forehead, whispered prayers, and begged him to stay alive. "Please, my son," she whispered, her tears falling onto his small hands. "You must live. You are all I have now." She didn't sleep that night. Her body ached, but she refused to leave his side. Every small breath he took felt like a miracle. The doctor returned the next morning and gave her more medicine. "He is young," he said softly. "There is hope." For 2 days, the house stayed silent. The maids moved quietly, and even Bako, who had once spoken against keeping the baby, came to the door and said, "Madam, I am praying too." On the third morning, as the first rays of sun entered the room, Tari opened his eyes. He blinked weakly, then gave a small sound, half cough, half laugh. Ebony gasped. She touched his cheek gently and felt the warmth fading. His fever had broken. She covered her face with her hands and began to cry, this time not from fear, but from relief. "Thank you, Lord," she whispered. "Thank you for giving him back to me." From that day, Ebony became even more protective of Tari. She no longer cared what people said. When her friends laughed at her, she smiled and said, "Let them laugh. Their hearts are empty, but mine is full." She began spending less time at business meetings and more time at home. She taught Tari simple words, played with him in the garden, and watched him take his first steps. When he called her Mama for the first time, she froze in shock. Then tears filled her eyes. She picked him up and held him close, whispering, "Yes, my son. I am your mother." Even Bako, the driver, started to care for the child. Sometimes he would carry Tari on his shoulders and walk around the compound while the boy giggled loudly. The maids who once feared that Ebony had lost her mind now loved the boy deeply. Ebony noticed how everyone changed because of Tari. The house that once felt cold and proud was now full of kindness. The servants smiled more, and laughter filled the air. It was as if the baby had brought light into every corner of her life. At night, when she looked at him sleeping, she often thought about the day she found him. How easily she could have walked away. How easily she could have called the police and forgotten him. But she hadn't. She had chosen to open her door and her heart. And though she didn't know what the future would bring, she knew one thing for certain. This child had saved her from a life of emptiness. She touched his small hand gently and whispered, "You are my promise, Tari. You are the reason I still believe in love." Outside, the night wind blew softly through the garden, carrying the scent of fresh flowers. Inside, Ebony sat in silence, her heart full of peace. For the first time in many years, she didn't feel alone. The afternoon sun was hot in Eldora, and Madame Ebony sat in her garden with little Tari playing beside her. He was now almost 2 years old, running around with a small wooden toy in his hand. His laughter filled the air like music. Ebony smiled as she watched him. Every time he called, "Mama," her heart melted. She had built her life around him now. Just as she was about to call the maid for juice, she heard a faint knock at the gate. It wasn't loud, just a weak tap-tap-tap that sounded almost afraid. Her guard, Bako, went to check. After a moment, he came back looking puzzled. "Madam," he said softly, "there is a woman outside. She looks very poor. Says she wants to see you." Ebony frowned slightly. "Did she say her name?" "Yes," Bako replied. "She said her name is Zuri." The name didn't sound familiar. Still, something in his tone made Ebony curious. "Let her in," she said. A few moments later, a young woman stepped into the compound. Her clothes were worn out and dusty. Her hair looked uncombed, and her hands trembled as she tried to greet Ebony. She looked weak, as if she hadn't eaten in days. "Good afternoon, madam," she said in a soft, broken voice. Ebony studied her carefully. "Good afternoon. Who are you, and what brings you here?" The woman's eyes filled with tears. "Madam," she began, "I'm sorry for coming like this. I didn't know where else to go." "Go on," Ebony said, her voice calm but firm. The woman took a deep breath. "I am the mother of the boy you found, Tari." Ebony froze. For a few seconds, she didn't say a word. The world seemed to stop. She looked at the woman again, unsure if she had heard right. Zuri lowered her head, tears rolling down her cheeks. "Yes, madam. He is my son. I left him at your gate that cold morning. I had nothing, no food, no home, no help. I was desperate." Ebony felt her chest tighten. Her first feeling was anger. How could any mother abandon her child? But as she looked at Zuri, that anger softened into confusion and sadness. The girl looked no older than 20. Her face was tired and thin, her eyes full of pain. "Why did you not go to the police?" Ebony asked slowly. Zuri shook her head. "I was afraid, madam. My husband died before Tari was born. I came to the city to find work, but I was cheated by people. I slept on the streets with the baby. I had no milk to feed him. I prayed all night and finally left him at your gate because I thought maybe someone like you would care for him. I couldn't watch him die." Ebony sat quietly. Her heart was heavy. She could feel the truth in Zuri's trembling voice. "You left him in my care," Ebony said softly. "But do you know how much I have loved him? He is my son now." Zuri wiped her eyes. "I know, madam. I have seen it. People in town talk about the rich woman who took in a baby. When I heard the name Tari, I knew it was him. I came here not to take him away. I just wanted to see him. To thank you." Ebony's eyes filled with tears. She didn't know what to say. At that moment, Tari toddled toward them, holding his toy. He looked up at Zuri and smiled shyly, his tiny teeth showing. Zuri covered her mouth as she began to cry harder. "My boy," she whispered. "My sweet boy." Tari didn't understand, but he laughed and reached out his small hand to touch her face. Ebony watched the scene quietly. Something deep inside her stirred. She could see the pain and love in Zuri's eyes, the kind only a mother could have. Finally, she spoke. "You have suffered enough. You will not sleep on the streets again." Zuri looked up quickly. "Madam." "Come in," Ebony said gently. "You will work here. I will not send you away. Together, we will raise him." Zuri dropped to her knees, crying harder. "Madam, I do not deserve your kindness." "Stand up," Ebony said softly. "You are not a beggar here. You are a mother." Bako and the maids, who had been watching quietly from the doorway, were surprised. None of them had seen Ebony this gentle before. The woman who once lived with pride and distance now spoke with warmth and compassion. From that day on, Zuri began working in the house. She helped with cleaning, cooking, and sometimes looking after Tari. At first, it was awkward. The child didn't know who she was. He still ran to Ebony whenever he wanted comfort. But over time, he began to warm to Zuri too. Ebony would watch them sometimes, Zuri singing softly while Tari played on her lap. It made her heart ache in a strange way. She loved the boy deeply, but she could see that Zuri shared a bond with him that went beyond words. At night, when everyone slept, Ebony often sat by the window thinking about it. She wondered if one day Zuri would want to take Tari away. The thought frightened her, but then she remembered what the girl had said, that she didn't come to take him, only to thank her. As days passed, the house grew more alive. Laughter returned. Even Bako, who used to be strict and quiet, now joked with Zuri. The two women became close, almost like sisters. Ebony began to realize how lonely her life had been before they arrived. One evening, while they were all having dinner, Zuri looked at Ebony and said, "Madam, I sometimes ask myself what would have happened if you hadn't opened your door that day. My son might not be alive." Ebony smiled gently. "And I sometimes ask myself what would have happened if I had closed my door that day. My heart might still be empty." Zuri lowered her eyes, too emotional to speak. After that night, They shared everything: their stories, their sorrows, their hopes. Ebony taught Zuri how to read and write during quiet afternoons. Zuri, in return, taught Ebony how to cook simple village meals she had never tried before. They laughed often and cried sometimes. Little Tari grew up between them, never lacking love. He called Ebony Mama and Zuri Mama Zuri. He didn't understand what it meant yet, but both women smiled every time he said it. It was as if fate had joined two broken hearts through one small child. Ebony had once thought she was the one saving Tari, but now she realized something deeper. In truth, he was the one who had saved them both, the rich woman who had forgotten love and the poor mother who had lost hope. That evening, as the sun went down behind the garden trees, Ebony stood watching Zuri play with the boy. She whispered quietly to herself, "That day, I thought I opened my door for a baby. I didn't know I was opening it for a family." The gentle sound of laughter filled the air again, soft and pure. Two women, from two very different worlds, stood side by side, both mothers in their own way, both bound by the same love. And from that day on, their lives were never the same again. The years went by quietly in Eldora, and time changed everything for Madame Ebony. The proud woman who once cared only for her business and her name had become someone softer, someone wiser. Her mansion, which used to feel cold and empty, now rang with laughter and love. Tari had grown into a cheerful boy, full of questions and dreams. Zuri had become more like a daughter than a servant, always by Ebony's side. Together, they had turned the big house into a home filled with warmth. Every morning, Ebony liked to sit in the garden with her cup of tea while watching Tari chase butterflies. The boy would often run to her, holding tiny flowers in his small hands. "Mama, look," he would say proudly. She would smile and tuck the flowers behind his ear, laughing at his excitement. Neighbors who once gossiped about her now greeted her with respect. They whispered among themselves, "The proud woman has changed." And it was true. Ebony had changed in every way. She was no longer the woman who hid her heart behind expensive jewelry and fine clothes. She no longer cared about what the rich society thought of her. Her happiness now came from giving, not from showing off. One afternoon, as she sat with Zuri sewing some old clothes, Ebony said, "Do you remember the day you came to my gate, trembling and afraid?" Zuri nodded quietly. "Yes, madam. I remember it every day. You saved me when no one else would." Ebony smiled softly. "No, Zuri. It was you and Tari who saved me. Before you came, I had everything but peace. I was rich but lonely. You gave me a reason to live again." Zuri looked down, her eyes filling with tears. "You gave me a home, madam. You gave me a second life." Ebony reached out and held her hand gently. "Then maybe we saved each other." That evening, as she watched Zuri and Tari playing outside, Ebony thought deeply about all the mothers and children who didn't have what they had found together. She remembered her own fear the day she found Tari and the pain she had seen in Zuri's eyes. She thought of the women she saw begging with babies on the streets of Eldora, tired and hopeless. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat at her desk with a candle burning low and began to write. She wrote about a place, a home for mothers and babies who had nowhere to go. A place where they could find food, rest, and love. She decided to use her wealth for something good, something lasting. A few months later, people in Eldora were surprised to see builders working near the edge of town. Ebony had bought a piece of land and was building something new. When asked what it was, she smiled and said, "It will be called the Promise House." Everyone wanted to know why she chose that name. She simply replied, "Because every life, no matter how small, is a promise." When the building was finished, it was beautiful, not large or grand like her mansion, but full of light. There were small rooms with warm beds, a kitchen that smelled of fresh bread, and a garden where children could play. Zuri helped Ebony manage the place, and soon, women began arriving. Poor mothers with babies, young girls who had been left alone, widows who had lost everything. Ebony welcomed each of them with open arms. She made sure they had food to eat, clothes to wear, and doctors to care for their children. She listened to their stories and comforted them when they cried. Every woman who entered the Promise House found not just help, but hope. Tari loved to visit the place. He played with the babies and made them laugh. Sometimes he would tell Zuri, "Mama Zuri, one day I'll build a big hospital next to this house, so no baby will ever die from sickness. Zuri would smile and say, "You have your mother's heart, my boy." Whenever Ebony visited the home, the women would rise to greet her. Some called her Mama Ebony. Others simply hugged her in gratitude. Each time she left, her eyes filled with tears, not of sadness, but of joy. One afternoon, while walking through the halls of the Promise House, Ebony stopped to watch a young mother feeding her child. The woman looked tired but peaceful. The sight made Ebony's chest tighten. She remembered the day she had found Tari, the way his tiny cries had broken her silence. She also remembered Zuri's trembling hands and how both of them had changed her life. As she stood there, Zuri came beside her and said, "Madam, the house is full now. We may need to build another." Ebony chuckled softly. "Then we will build another. There will always be space for one more heart in need." In the evenings, people passing by the Promise House could hear laughter and singing. Women cooked together, babies giggled, and sometimes Ebony would join them, helping serve food or reading stories to the children. It was a different kind of joy, simple, quiet, and real. When the town's elders asked her why she gave away so much of her wealth, Ebony replied, "We all need a second chance, even hearts like mine." Her words spread through Eldora, touching many lives. People began donating clothes, food, and money to support her work. The same people who once mocked her now came to seek her advice. Even the mayor of the town visited her home and said, "Madam Ebony, you have done what no one else has. You have turned kindness into a legacy." She smiled and answered, "Kindness is the only wealth worth keeping." Years passed, and the Promise House became a well-known name in the region. Women came from faraway towns, seeking help, and they always found it. Tari grew into a fine young man, strong and intelligent. He studied hard and often spent his weekends helping his mother and Zuri with the home. Sometimes, Ebony would sit quietly on her porch in the evenings, watching the sunset. The same porch where, years ago, she had found a crying baby wrapped in a torn blanket. She would close her eyes and think about how one small moment of mercy had changed everything. Zuri would join her sometimes, bringing tea. They would sit together in silence, their hearts full. "Do you ever regret opening that door?" Zuri once asked softly. Ebony smiled, her eyes glistening in the fading light. "Not for a single second," she said. "That door opened my life." Then she looked at the children running in the garden, their laughter rising into the evening air, and added, "If I had not found him that morning, I would never have found myself." And as the sun went down behind the hills, the lights from the Promise House glowed softly in the distance, like tiny stars on earth, a reminder that even the proudest heart can learn to love, and even the darkest life can shine again. Tari grew into a tall, gentle young man with a smile that warmed every room. He was loved by everyone in Eldora, not only because he was Madam Ebony's son, but because of his heart. He had seen kindness from the day he was found, and he had learned from two women who had taught him that love could change everything. From Zuri, he learned compassion. From Ebony, he learned strength and purpose. As a child, Tari had always been curious about people. He asked questions, listened carefully, and showed care for anyone who suffered. When other children wanted toys, Tari wanted books about healing. He often followed the town doctor, asking how he helped the sick. The doctor used to laugh and say, "You will take my place one day, young Tari." And that was exactly what he did. When Tari became a man, he went to the city to study medicine. It was not easy. The city was loud and full of people who did not know him. He missed Eldora and the peaceful days at the Promise House. But whenever he felt lonely, he remembered his mother's words, "Every good thing you do is a promise kept." Those words gave him strength. Years later, Tari returned to Eldora as a doctor. The people welcomed him with open arms. They said, "The boy who was found on a doorstep has come back to heal us." And truly, that was what he did. Tari opened small clinics in villages where people had never seen a doctor before. He treated mothers, children, and old men without asking for money. When people tried to thank him, he would simply smile and say, "My story began at a doorstep, and love opened the door." Ebony was proud beyond words. Even in her old age, she would sit outside the Promise House and listen to people talk about her son's kindness. "He has your heart," Zuri would say, placing a shawl over Ebony's shoulders. Ebony would laugh softly. "No, he has his own." better than mine ever was. Tari never forgot his roots. Though he became successful, he stayed humble. He built more clinics and even started a small training center where young people could learn to become nurses. He named it Zuri Health Center, in honor of the woman who had once come to his mother's gate begging for help but became part of their family. Zuri cried when she saw the name written on the building. "You didn't have to do this, Tari," she said softly. Tari smiled. "You gave me love when I didn't even know where I came from. You and Mama Ebony made me who I am. This is for both of you." Ebony's health began to fade as the years passed. Her once strong body grew weak, and she could no longer walk around the Promise House as she used to. Still, every morning, she asked to be taken to the garden where she could hear the laughter of children. Zuri stayed beside her, taking care of her every need. She refused to let anyone else do it. "She cared for me when I was lost," Zuri said. "Now it is my turn." On one quiet evening, as the sun painted the sky in orange and gold, Ebony lay on her bed surrounded by the two people she loved most, Tari and Zuri. Her breathing was slow, and her voice was faint, but her eyes were full of peace. "Tari," she whispered, "my son, you have made me proud. You gave back to the world what it once gave to you, a second chance." Tari held her hand gently. "Mama, you're the reason I live to help others. You taught me what love means." She smiled weakly. "Love is the only medicine that heals all wounds." Zuri wiped her tears and leaned close. "Rest now, madam. You've done enough. We will keep your dream alive." Ebony's eyes moved between them one last time, her lips curving into a soft smile. "True wealth," she whispered, "is not in gold, but in the hearts we heal." With those words, her eyes slowly closed, and her hand went still. The house was silent for a long time. Zuri wept quietly, and Tari held her hand. Though the room felt heavy with sadness, there was also peace, the kind that comes when a good life has been lived well. After Ebony's burial, people came from far and near to honor her. Mothers who had lived in the Promise House brought their children, now grown, to pay their respects. One woman said, "If not for her, my son would not be alive today." Another whispered, "She gave me hope when the world turned away." The crowd was full of tears and love. Tari stood before them, dressed in simple white clothes, just as his mother would have liked. He looked at the crowd and spoke gently. "My mother taught me that love is not something we talk about, it's something we do. She gave her heart to this town, and it is our duty to keep it beating." He then announced that the Promise House would continue to help mothers and children, and a new clinic would be built beside it, the Ebony Health Center. The crowd cheered, and Zuri smiled through her tears. Years went on, and Tari kept his promise. The small home his mother had built grew into a large foundation that helped thousands of families. Children who once came there sick and weak grew strong and returned to help others. The story of Madame Ebony spread across the land, inspiring people to act with kindness. Tari never married early. He said he was already married, to his purpose. But later, he met a woman named Lila, a nurse who worked at one of his clinics. She was gentle, wise, and shared his dream of helping others. They married quietly in the Promise House garden, with Zuri blessing them. When they had their first child, a baby girl, Tari named her Ebony, to keep his mother's name alive. Sometimes, he would hold her in his arms and whisper, "You carry the heart of a woman who taught the world what love can do." Zuri, now gray-haired but strong, continued to live with them. She became like a grandmother to little Ebony, telling her stories every night about the day her father was found on a doorstep. The child would listen wide-eyed and always end by saying, "That was the best door ever opened." Tari laughed every time he heard it. And deep in his heart, he knew it was true. His mother's single act of mercy had changed countless lives, his, Zuri's, and many others. As the years went by, whenever people spoke about kindness, they would say, "Remember Madame Ebony, the woman who turned gold into good." And whenever Tari visited her grave, he would kneel and whisper, "Mama, your promise lives on. Every life I heal is a piece of your heart still beating." The wind would blow softly across the field, and the flowers planted around her grave would sway gently, as if answering him. The story of the rich lady who once found a baby on her doorstep became a legend in Eldora, told to children as a bedtime tale. It was no longer just a story about wealth or charity, it was about how love, once opened like a door, could never be closed again.